Okay, so here's a fact that should honestly freak you out a little. Right now, sitting in your brain, there are things you're absolutely certain are true that are completely, provably false. And you didn't get fooled because you're dumb. You got fooled because somebody, somewhere, said the lie enough times that your brain just quietly filed it under true and stopped asking questions. That's not paranoia. That's a documented effect with a name and a 1977 study behind it, and we're about to crawl all the way inside it. If this kind of stuff scratches an itch in your brain, do yourself a favor and subscribe. We post this every single week. Hit the bell too if you're feeling spicy. Cool, that's the only time I'll bug you about it. Let's get weird. So let's start with the big one, because once you see it, you literally cannot unsee it. It's called the illusory truth effect, and the basic idea is so simple it's almost insulting. Your brain treats things that feel familiar as if they're true. That's it. That's the whole con. Familiarity feels like truth. And the easiest way to make something feel familiar is to just repeat it. Over and over and over. Doesn't have to be true. Doesn't need a shred of evidence behind it. It just has to be repeated. Now, you'd think, come on, my brain isn't that gullible. I check facts. I think for myself. Yeah, you're not alone in thinking that. Basically, everybody thinks that about themselves. But unfortunately, you're wrong. And here's the study that proves it. In 1977, 3 researchers, Hasher, Goldstein, and Topino, ran an experiment that's basically the founding document of this whole thing. They took a big pile of statements, some true, some false, the kind of trivia where most people genuinely don't know the answer off the top of their head. And they showed these statements to people across multiple sessions, spread out over weeks. Some of the statements got repeated across those sessions. Some only showed up once. And every time, they asked people to rate how true each statement felt. Here's the crazy part. The statements that got repeated, people rated them as more true. Not because they got new information, not because anyone proved anything, purely because they'd seen the statement before. The repetition alone cranked up the believability. And it didn't matter whether the statement was actually true or actually false. A repeated lie climbed the truth ladder right alongside a repeated fact. Your brain doesn't keep a clean little tag that says, hey, this is just familiar, not verified. It blurs the two together. Familiar starts to feel like fact. And let me explain why this is so brutal, because it gets worse the more you think about it. Your brain is lazy. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as basic engineering. Thinking hard is expensive metabolically. So your brain is always looking for shortcuts, little ways to get to a conclusion without burning a ton of energy. And one of its favorite shortcuts is something psychologists call processing fluency. Basically, if a piece of information is easy to process, easy to read, easy to recall, easy to understand, your brain goes, this feels smooth, this feels right, this is probably true. And guess what makes information easy to process? Having heard it before. The second, third, 10th time you encounter a claim, it slides into your brain like butter. No friction. And your brain reads that lack of friction as a signal of truth. So think about what that means out in the wild. Every advertisement you've ever seen that just repeats a slogan at you, every rumor that goes around your friend group, every headline you scroll past on your phone, even one you don't click, even one you don't believe in the moment, it's all getting logged. It's all building that familiarity. And weeks later, when the topic comes up, you might find yourself nodding along to something you never actually verified, something you absorbed purely through repetition, like water soaking into a sponge. Now here's a detail that's going to sting. You might be thinking, okay, fine, but this only works on people who don't know the real answer, right? If I actually know the truth, repetition can't fool me. For a long time, researchers thought that too. Knowledge was supposed to be the armor. If you knew the correct fact, a repeated lie would just bounce right off you. Except newer studies poked at that and found something genuinely unsettling. The illusory truth effect can leak through even when you do know better. People who could correctly answer a question would still rate a repeated false version of it as more believable when it was thrown at them fast, when they weren't actively concentrating. Your stored knowledge doesn't automatically jump up and defend you. It just sits there in a filing cabinet. And meanwhile, the smooth, familiar feeling of the repeated claim is whispering in your other ear, going, yeah, this sounds right. And in the moment, when you're tired and scrolling and not thinking hard, the whisper often wins. Let me put you in the scene for a sec. Picture this. You're at a dinner table. Someone, your uncle, a coworker, whoever, says something with total confidence. Oh yeah, you only use 10% of your brain. And around the table, heads nod. Because everyone's heard it. It feels true. It's been in movies, it's been in articles, it's been repeated so many times across your entire life that it has the weight of gravity. It feels less like an opinion and more like a law of physics. And nobody at that table is being stupid. They're being human. They're running on the exact shortcut we just talked about. The claim is familiar, so it feels true, so it gets passed along, which makes it even more familiar for the next person. It's a self-feeding loop. A lie that survives and spreads purely because it's been said a lot. And that brings us perfectly to the next part, because there's a whole graveyard of these things. Beliefs that millions of people hold, not because there's evidence, but purely because of repetition. Let's actually walk through a few of the big ones, because each one is a perfect little case study in how this con works. First up, the sugar one. The idea that sugar makes kids hyperactive. You've heard this your entire life. Birthday party, kids bouncing off the walls, and every adult in the room goes, "Oh, it's the sugar, they're on a sugar high." It is treated as obvious, common sense, settled fact. Here's the thing though, when researchers actually tested this, properly, in controlled studies, they could not find the effect. They'd take kids, give some of them sugar and some of them a sugar-free placebo, and crucially, the experiment was set up so nobody knew which kid got which. And the kids who got sugar did not behave any more wildly than the kids who got the fake stuff. The hyperactivity just wasn't there in the data. But here's the part that's genuinely fascinating, and it ties into something we'll hit later. They also ran a version where they told parents their kid had just gotten a big dose of sugar, when actually, the kid got nothing. And those parents rated their own children as more hyperactive. The kid did nothing different. The sugar didn't exist. But the parent expected chaos, so the parent saw chaos. The belief literally manufactured the observation. So why do kids actually go bananas at birthday parties? Probably because, it's a party. They're excited. They're with a pile of other kids. There's games and chaos and stimulation everywhere. The sugar got blamed because the sugar belief was already sitting there, familiar and ready, repeated a million times, waiting to take the credit. Next one, the 10% of your brain thing. This is maybe the king of repetition myths. The claim that we only use 10% of our brains and the other 90% is just sitting there, dormant, untapped, waiting to be unlocked. It sounds amazing. It's hopeful. It implies you've got this massive hidden reserve of genius just waiting. Entire movies have been built on this premise. And it's nonsense. Brain imaging shows that over the course of a day, you use basically all of your brain. Different regions light up for different tasks, sure. You're not firing every neuron at the exact same instant, but there's no vast dead zone of unused brain matter. From an evolutionary standpoint, it would be absurd anyway. Your brain is this incredibly expensive organ. It burns something like a fifth of your energy while being a tiny fraction of your body weight. Evolution does not build a giant energy-guzzling organ and then leave 90% of it switched off doing nothing. That's like building a mansion and only ever using the closet. It makes no sense. But the myth survives. Why? Because it's been repeated forever, and because it feels good, and the combination of familiar plus pleasant is basically rocket fuel for a false belief. Third one, lightning never strikes the same place twice. You've heard this used as a comforting little metaphor 1,000 times. The problem is it's just flatly, physically wrong. Lightning strikes the same place all the time. Tall things, conductive things, things that stick up into the sky, they get hit repeatedly. The Empire State Building gets struck dozens of times a year, every single year. Lightning isn't superstitious. It doesn't keep a little notebook going, "Oh, I already hit that spot, can't go there again." It goes for the path of least resistance. And if that tall, pointy thing was the path of least resistance once, it's going to be the path of least resistance again. But the saying persists because it's catchy, it's tidy, and it's been repeated so many times that the repetition itself became the evidence. Nobody stops to check it because it feels true, and it feels true because everybody says it, and everybody says it because it feels true. Round and round. And you can see the pattern now, right? These beliefs aren't surviving on evidence. They're surviving on repetition. They are essentially viruses made of words, and the thing they're good at isn't being correct, it's being repeatable. The catchier it is, the easier it is to say, the better it spreads. And the better it spreads, the the more familiar it gets. And the more familiar it gets, the truer it feels. Truth has nothing to do with whether one of these survives. It's pure transmission fitness. Now let me hit you with the part that really turns this from, interesting, into, oh no. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about the illusory truth effect. The people who understand it best are not using it to make you smarter. They're using it on you. Advertisers know this. They don't run the same slogan at you 40 times because they think you missed it the first time. They run it 40 times because they know that the 40th time, that slogan is going to feel like a fact in your bones. Political operatives know this. The whole game of repeating a simple phrase, a talking point, a label, over and over across every channel, that's not an accident. That's the illusory truth effect deployed as a weapon. They are literally manufacturing belief through repetition. And the scary thing is, it works whether the thing they're repeating is true or false. The mechanism doesn't care. It's a knife that cuts the same way, no matter who's holding it. So how do you actually defend yourself against this one? Because I'm not going to just freak you out and leave you hanging. The defense is annoyingly simple to say and genuinely hard to do, but it works. The defense is to consciously separate two questions that your brain wants to smush together. Question 1. Does this feel familiar? Question 2. Do I actually have a reason to believe this is true? Your brain merges those into one feeling. Your job is to pry them apart. When something feels true, get in the habit of pausing and going, wait, do I believe this because I've examined it, or do I believe this because I've just heard it a lot? That little gap, that half second of friction you deliberately add, that's your armor. Because the whole effect runs on the absence of friction. The smoothness is the trap. So you reintroduce friction on purpose. You ask where a claim came from. You notice when something is being repeated at you suspiciously often. You treat "everybody knows this" as a yellow flag instead of a green light. It won't make you immune. Nobody's immune. But it turns the volume down on the whisper. And sometimes that's enough to catch the lie before it files itself away. And that's why this effect is honestly the perfect one to start with, because it shapes the ground all the others stand on. It's about what you believe and how that belief gets installed without your permission. Which just goes to show, the most dangerous lies aren't the ones shouted once. They're the ones murmured 1,000 times until they stop sounding like lies at all. Now, speaking of things your brain does without asking you, let me introduce you to a little gremlin that lives in your head and refuses to let you rest. It's called the Zeigarnik effect, and once you know about it, you're going to recognize it operating in your life literally every single day. Because here's the deal. Your brain is weirdly, almost obsessively attached to things you haven't finished. Unfinished business haunts you. Finished business evaporates. And the gap between those two is wild. Let me drop you into the origin story because it's one of the great little moments in psychology, and it happened of all places, at a restaurant. The year is the 1920s. Picture a busy cafe in Europe. A psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik is sitting there, and she notices something strange about the waiters. These waiters could hold an absolutely massive, complicated order in their heads. No notepad. Table of 6. Everybody wants something different. Modifications, drinks, the whole 9 yards. And the waiter just remembers all of it, flawlessly, and delivers it perfectly. Impressive, right? But here's the twist that caught her attention. The instant that order was paid for, the instant the transaction was complete and the bill was settled, the waiter forgot the entire thing. Completely. Like it had been wiped. If you went back and asked them 5 minutes later what that table had ordered, they'd have no clue. The memory that had been crystal clear a moment ago was just gone the second the task was done. And that's the whole effect in a nutshell. Your brain holds on to unfinished tasks with a death grip, keeping them active, keeping them nagging, keeping them present in your awareness. But the moment a task is completed, your brain goes, "Great, done, file it away, forget it," and releases the grip. The open loop gets attention. The closed loop gets dumped. Zeigarnik didn't just leave it at a cool restaurant observation, by the way. She took it into the lab and tested it properly. She had people work on a bunch of little tasks, simple stuff, puzzles and manual tasks. And here's the sneaky part. For some of the tasks, she let people finish them. For others, she interrupted them partway through, didn't let them complete it. Then later, she asked everyone to recall the tasks they'd worked on. And the results were clear. People remembered the interrupted, unfinished tasks significantly better than the ones they'd actually completed. The incomplete ones stuck. The completed ones faded. Just like the waiters. The unfinished stuff stays lit up in your mind, demanding to be resolved, while the finished stuff quietly dissolves. Let me explain what's actually going on under the hood, because it makes a lot of sense once you see it. Your brain treats an unfinished task as a kind of open file, an unresolved tension. And it doesn't like unresolved tension. So it keeps that file open, keeps it accessible, keeps poking you with little reminders, keeps it in a state of low-grade mental readiness. That's the nagging feeling. That's the thing that pops into your head while you're trying to fall asleep. That's the task you can't stop half thinking about while you're doing something else. It's your brain keeping the loop open until it gets the satisfaction of closing it. And the moment it closes, relief. And the brain happily lets the whole thing go. Now here's where this gets genuinely useful and also genuinely manipulative, depending on who's using it. Because once you understand that open loops grab and hold your attention, you can start spotting how this is used on you everywhere. Here's the crazy part. Basically, every form of media you consume is weaponizing the Zeigarnik effect against you, on purpose, to keep you hooked. Think about a TV show that ends on a cliffhanger. That's an open loop, deliberately created. The episode doesn't resolve, the tension stays unfinished, and now your brain is gnawing on it, can't stop thinking about it, has to know what happens next. They didn't end it there because it was the natural stopping point. They ended it there because an open loop is a hook in your brain, and they know you'll come back to close it. Video games do it. Quest in progress, that little unfinished bar, that one more thing you need to do. Apps do it. That little red notification badge with a number on it, that's an open loop. It's an unfinished task screaming at the part of your brain that hates unfinished tasks. And it's astonishingly hard to ignore because you're fighting your own wiring. Even the classic cliffhanger structure of storytelling, going back forever, taps into this. The reason to be continued works. The reason a serialized story keeps you coming back week after week is that an unresolved narrative is an open loop your brain refuses to drop. The storyteller deliberately leaves the loop open, so it lives in your head rent-free until the next installment closes it. But okay, let's flip it, because here's the genuinely good news. You can take this exact same effect and turn it into a tool that works for you instead of against you. And it's one of the most practical pieces of psychology there is. Say you're a chronic procrastinator. You've got some big, scary task you keep avoiding, and starting feels impossible because the whole thing looms over you. Here's the trick. Just start. Do a tiny piece of it, 5 minutes. One paragraph. One small chunk. Because the second you start, you've created an open loop. And now the Zeigarnik effect kicks in and works in your favor. That unfinished task starts nagging you, pulling at you, sitting in the back of your mind going, hey, you started this, let's finish it. The very same mechanism that makes a cliffhanger irresistible now makes your own unfinished work irresistible to return to. Starting is the whole battle, because starting opens the loop, and once the loop is open, your brain itself becomes your accountability partner. There's another flip side that's worth knowing, and it cuts the other way. Sometimes the Zeigarnik effect is the reason you can't relax. Ever finish a long day and you just can't switch off? Your mind keeps churning through everything you didn't get done. That's all those open loops, still lit up, still demanding resolution. And there's a neat fix for it that researchers have actually looked at. If you write the unfinished tasks down, make a concrete plan for when and how you'll handle them, your brain often calms down. Why? Because writing down a plan acts like a partial closure. You've told your brain, it's handled, here's the plan, you can let go now, and the brain relaxes its grip. The loop isn't fully closed, but it's been acknowledged and parked, and that's frequently enough to quiet the nagging. So that thing your grandma told you about making a to-do list before bed? Turns out there's real psychology under it. You're not finishing the tasks, you're just giving your brain permission to stop holding them. So that's the Zeigarnik effect. Unfinished business haunts you, finished business evaporates, and once you know that, you can see the hooks in your media, defeat your own procrastination, and quiet your racing mind. All by managing your open loops on purpose. It's a gremlin, sure, but it's a gremlin you can put to work. Now here's a question that ties our first two ideas together before we move on. Notice what both of these effects have in common. The illusory truth effect hijacks what you believe. The Zygarnik effect hijacks what you can't stop thinking about. Both of them operate below the level of your conscious choice. You're not deciding to believe the repeated lie. You're not deciding to obsess over the unfinished task. Your brain is doing it automatically, running ancient machinery that mostly served you well, but can absolutely be turned against you. And that theme, automatic machinery that can be exploited, is going to keep coming back, because it's basically the whole story of how these psychological effects work. And it leads us right into maybe the most chilling one of the entire bunch, because this next effect isn't about what you believe or what you think about. It's about whether you'll act at all when it actually counts. Whether in a genuine emergency with someone's life on the line, you'll do anything, or just stand there. It's called the bystander effect. And the brutal headline is this: the more people who are watching, the less likely any single one of them is to help. Read that again, because it's so counterintuitive it almost feels like a typo. You'd think a crowd means safety, right? More people, more help, better odds someone steps in. That's the common sense assumption. More eyes, more hands, more rescue. And it's exactly backwards. A crowd can become a trap where everyone watches and nobody moves. Let me put you inside it, because this is the kind of thing you really have to feel to understand. Picture this. You're walking down a busy city street, hundreds of people around, and someone up ahead suddenly collapses, clutches their chest, goes down hard, clearly in serious trouble. Now, what happens in your head in that moment? You see all these other people around, and some part of your brain goes, well, somebody's gonna help. Look at all these people. Surely someone closer, someone more qualified, someone will step in. And here's the thing. Basically, everyone in that crowd is thinking the exact same thought at the exact same time. Everyone is assuming everyone else will handle it. And so the person lies there, and the crowd flows around them, and the help that everyone assumed was coming never actually comes. Because responsibility, when it's spread across 100 people, somehow evaporates entirely. Each person feels only 1/100th of the duty to act, and 1/100th of a duty often isn't enough to overcome the hesitation, the awkwardness, the fear of being wrong. This has a name within the effect. It's called diffusion of responsibility. When you're the only person around and someone needs help, 100% of the responsibility lands squarely on you. There's no one to pass it to. It's all yours, and that weight usually makes you act. But add more people, and that responsibility gets diluted, divided up, spread thin across the whole crowd, until each individual feels almost none of it. The presence of others literally lets you off the hook in your own mind. It's not specifically my job. There are all these other people. Someone else has got it. And the more people there are, the thinner everyone's slice of responsibility, and the more likely it is that the awful arithmetic adds up to nobody. There's a second mechanism stacked on top of that too, and it's almost worse because it's so human. It's called pluralistic ignorance, and it works like this. In an ambiguous situation, when you're not totally sure if something is a real emergency, you look around at other people to figure out how to react. You take your cues from the crowd. But here's the trap. Everyone else is also looking around, taking their cues from the crowd. So you've got a whole group of people, each one glancing at the others, each one staying calm because everyone else looks calm, each one thinking, well, nobody else seems alarmed, so maybe this isn't actually an emergency. Maybe I'm overreacting. And that collective calm is fake. It's a hall of mirrors. Everyone's calm is built on everyone else's calm, and underneath it, individually, people might actually be worried. But nobody wants to be the one who panics over nothing, the one who makes a scene, the one who's wrong in front of strangers. So everyone freezes, performing calm for an audience that's also just performing calm. And the real emergency goes unaddressed because the crowd talked itself out of seeing it. Researchers nailed this down in some pretty dramatic experiments. In one classic setup, they'd have a person sitting in a room filling out a questionnaire, and then smoke would start pouring in under the door. Actual smoke, the kind that, if you were alone, would have you up and out of there in seconds going, something is on fire. And when people were alone in the room, that's exactly what they did. The vast majority got up quickly and went to report it. But when they put that same person in the room with other people, Other people who were secretly in on the experiment and instructed to just sit there calmly and do nothing. The real participant often just sat there, smoke filling the room, and they'd keep filling out their questionnaire, glancing at the calm people around them, waving the smoke away from their face, talking themselves out of the obvious. Some of them sat in a smoke-filled room for an extended period without doing anything, purely because the other people in the room weren't reacting. The social signal, everyone's fake calm, completely overrode the literal smoke in their lungs. That's how powerful this is. It can override the smell of something burning. Now, here's the part where I make this real, because the bystander effect isn't just a lab curiosity, it has genuine life and death stakes, and there's a piece of practical knowledge here that you should carry with you for the rest of your life. Because the defense against the bystander effect, if you're ever the one who needs help, is shockingly simple and shockingly effective. And here it is. You destroy the diffusion of responsibility by destroying the anonymity. You make it personal. You point at one specific person and you say, directly to them, you in the blue jacket, call an ambulance, now. Let me explain why that works so well. The instant you single out one person, all that diffused, spread-thin responsibility comes rushing back and lands entirely on them. They can no longer think someone else will do it, because you just told them, specifically, that it's their job. There's no crowd to hide in anymore. You've yanked them out of the anonymous mass and made them an individual with a direct, assigned task. And people, when they're given a clear, specific instruction and singled out, overwhelmingly act on it. The hesitation collapses. So if you're ever the one on the ground, or you're trying to help someone and you need the crowd to move, do not yell, "Somebody call for help," because somebody is nobody. Somebody gets absorbed and diffused into the crowd and dies there. Instead, point. Pick a person. Pick a feature, the blue jacket, the red hat, the guy with the backpack. Assign the task to one human being, by description, looking right at them. You, blue jacket, call an ambulance. You, red hat, find an AED. Suddenly, responsibility is concentrated, not diffused, and people move. And flip it around, because the other side of this is just as important. If you're ever in a crowd and you see something happening, knowing about the bystander effect is itself your defense. Because now, when that little voice in your head goes, someone else will handle it, you can recognize that voice for what it is. That's not wisdom. That's not a reasonable assessment. That's the diffusion of responsibility talking, the exact same false reasoning that's running through every other head in the crowd. And the moment you recognize it, you can override it. You can be the one who breaks the spell, the one who steps forward, because you understand that the crowd's calm is fake, and the help everyone's waiting for has to start with somebody. And that somebody might as well be you. Knowing about the effect is what lets you beat it. The people in those smoke experiments didn't know. You do. That's a real advantage. Think about how the three effects so far stack up, because there's a thread running through all of them. The illusory truth effect manipulates belief through repetition. The Zeigarnik effect manipulates attention through unfinished loops. The bystander effect manipulates action, or really inaction, through the dilution of responsibility. In every single case, your brain is running an automatic program, a shortcut, a piece of social or cognitive wiring that usually works fine. And in every single case, that program can be hijacked by advertisers, by media companies, by the simple presence of a crowd, or just by the quirks of the situation you happen to be standing in. The whole point of learning these isn't to feel paranoid. It's to install a little override switch in your own head so the automatic program doesn't get the final word. Now, let me take you somewhere that's going to genuinely bend your sense of reality, because this next pair of effects proves that your mind isn't just shaping what you believe and how you act. It's shaping what your body literally, physically experiences. Your expectations can reach down into your flesh and change what happens there, and I mean measurable, real, biological change. This is the placebo effect, and its dark, nasty twin, the nocebo effect. You've heard of the placebo effect, probably. The basic version everyone knows is, give someone a fake pill, a sugar pill, no active ingredient whatsoever. Tell them it's medicine, and a meaningful chunk of them will actually get better. Their pain goes down, their symptoms ease. And the wild thing is, this isn't them lying or imagining it in some fluffy, it's all in your head way that doesn't count. The effects are real and measurable. Here's the part that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. The placebo effect is so strong, so reliably powerful, that it's one of the biggest headaches in all of medicine. When pharmaceutical companies test a new drug, they don't just test whether the drug works. They have to test whether the drug works better than a placebo. And let me explain why that's such a big deal. Because the placebo, the fake treatment, the nothing pill, already produces real improvement in a big slice of patients all on its own. So a new drug has to climb over the bar that the placebo already sets, and tons of drugs fail to do it. Not because they do nothing, but because they can't reliably beat the power of a sugar pill plus an expectation. Think about that. Belief alone clears a bar that real chemical compounds struggle to clear. That's how strong this is. So what's actually happening? How does a pill with literally nothing in it make real pain go away? The answer is expectation. And it turns out expectation isn't just a feeling, it's a physical event in your brain. When you believe you're receiving a treatment that will help you, your brain anticipates relief, and that anticipation triggers real biochemical changes. In the case of pain, for instance, the expectation of relief can cause your brain to release its own natural painkillers, your endorphins, your internal opioid system. We can actually see this. In studies where the placebo reduces pain, you can sometimes block that pain relief by giving a drug that blocks opioids, which tells you the placebo wasn't magic and it wasn't imaginary. It was your brain literally dosing your own body with homemade painkillers because it expected to feel better. The belief became chemistry. Your expectation reached down and pulled a physical lever inside your own nervous system. And it goes deeper than just pills. The whole ritual matters. A bigger pill can produce a bigger placebo effect than a smaller one. 2 pills can beat 1. A pill in fancy branded packaging can outperform a plain one. An injection, which feels more serious and more medical than swallowing a pill, can produce a stronger placebo response than a pill, even when the injection is just saline, just salt water. The color of the pill matters. The more elaborate, more impressive, more authoritative the treatment feels, the stronger your expectation. And the stronger your expectation, the bigger the real physical effect. Your brain is reading all these cues, the size, the color, the ritual, the confidence of the doctor, and it's calibrating how much relief to manufacture based on how convincing the whole performance is. It's almost theatrical. The show generates the cure. But here's where it turns dark, and this is the part that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The placebo effect has an evil twin. It's called the nocebo effect. And it's the exact same mechanism, expectation creating real physical change, except pointed in the worst possible direction. With the nocebo effect, your negative expectations produce real negative physical symptoms. A sugar pill, a nothing pill, can give you genuine side effects. Real headaches, real nausea, real dizziness, purely because you expected it to. Let me put you in the scene so it lands. Picture this, you're in a drug trial, and you're in the group getting the placebo, the fake pill, though you don't know that. The researcher hands you the pill and, being honest and thorough, reads you the long list of possible side effects. This may cause headache, nausea, fatigue, dizziness. You swallow your sugar pill, and then, over the next few days, you start to feel it. A headache creeps in, your stomach feels off, you're tired, and these symptoms are real, you genuinely feel them, except the pill you took was made of nothing. There was no chemical in there to cause any of it. Your expectation of side effects produced actual side effects. Your brain, primed to expect harm, manufactured the harm. This shows up constantly in drug trials, the placebo group reporting real side effects, sometimes even dropping out of the study because the side effects from the fake pill got too unpleasant. Side effects from nothing, from pure expectation of being hurt. And this isn't just a trial curiosity. It has real-world reach. Think about reading the gigantic, scary warning label on a medication, the one that lists every possible bad thing in tiny print. For some people, just reading that list and bracing for those effects can help bring them on. Think about a person who's convinced a certain food makes them sick and then feels genuinely ill after eating it, even in cases where blind testing shows their body isn't actually reacting to the food at all. Their dread is doing the work. The nocebo effect is your own expectations turning against you, your brain taking your fear of harm and making it flesh. It's the placebo's power, the same beautiful, astonishing power of belief to change the body, just aimed at hurting you instead of healing you. Now let me tie a bow on this with one more layer, because it brings the placebo effect crashing right back into your everyday life, way outside the doctor's office. Remember how we said the more impressive and expensive a treatment feels, the stronger the placebo response? Hold on to that, because here's a study finding that's going to change how you shop. Researchers have found that expensive products genuinely work better than cheap ones, even when they're identical, purely because of the price. In one study on pain, they gave people a placebo painkiller, same fake pill for everyone, but they told one group it was a cheap, discounted pill, and the other group that it was a brand new, expensive, premium painkiller. And the people who thought their pill was expensive reported significantly more pain relief than the people who thought theirs was cheap. Same pill, nothing in it. The only difference was the price tag in their heads, and the expensive price tag produced more real relief. The expectation that expensive equals effective became a self-fulfilling prophecy in their own bodies. And this goes way beyond medicine. It's everywhere in how you experience the things you buy. The pricey wine tastes better, and brain scans actually back this up. The pleasure centers of the brain light up more when people believe a wine is expensive, even when it's the exact same wine they were told was cheap a minute ago. The premium brand of painkiller works faster than the chemically identical generic sitting right next to it on the shelf for a fraction of the price. The expensive headphones, the luxury skincare, the high-end version of basically anything, a chunk of what you're getting, sometimes a big chunk, is the expectation that you bought something good. It's a placebo you paid extra for. Price and branding create the expectation, and the expectation creates a real experience, real pleasure, real relief, real, this works better. You are, in a very literal sense, often paying for a better placebo. So how do you defend against this corner of the mind? Well, the placebo effect is interesting because you don't necessarily want to fully defend against it. It can genuinely help you. Your brain's pharmacy is a real and useful thing. But on the consumer side, the defense is awareness. When you find yourself certain that the expensive thing is just better, pause and ask, is it actually better, or am I experiencing the price tag? Sometimes it really is better. But sometimes, you're paying a premium for a feeling that a generic would have given you for a fraction of the cost, if only you'd believed in it. And on the nocebo side, the defense is recognizing that dread itself can manufacture symptoms. Reading a warning label and bracing for doom can, for some people, help summon the very thing they fear. Knowing that doesn't make you reckless, it just lets you hold your own fear a little more lightly, with the understanding that expectation is a loaded gun, pointed in whichever direction you aim it. Which just goes to show how blurry the line really is between your mind and your body. We like to think of them as separate, the mind up here doing its thinking, the body down there doing its biology. But the placebo and nocebo effects rip that idea apart. Your beliefs release real chemicals, your expectations generate real symptoms. Your sense of what something costs changes how much pleasure or relief you physically feel. The mind isn't sitting on top of the body issuing commands from a distance. It's woven all the way through it, reaching down into your nerves and your chemistry and your very perception of pain and pleasure, shaping reality from the inside out. And here's the bigger thread pulling all of this together, the thing I want you to walk away chewing on. Every single effect we've talked about, the illusory truth effect, installing false beliefs through repetition, the Zeigarnik effect, chaining your attention to open loops, the bystander effect, freezing you in a crowd, the placebo and nocebo effects, turning your expectations into physical reality. Every one of them is your own mind running automatically, doing things you never consciously chose. You didn't decide that the repeated lie should feel true. You didn't decide to obsess over the unfinished task. You didn't decide to assume someone else would help. You didn't decide that the expensive pill should hurt less. Your brain did all of that on its own, running deep, ancient machinery that mostly serves you well, and occasionally gets hijacked by marketers, by media, by crowds, by your own fears. The reason knowing this matters so much is that awareness is the override switch. The bystander who knows about diffusion of responsibility can step forward. The shopper who knows about the price placebo can pause before assuming expensive means better. The person who knows about the illusory truth effect can separate "this feels familiar" from "this is actually true." The procrastinator who knows the Zeigarnik effect can start a task on purpose to weaponize their own brain against their own laziness. You can't turn these effects off. They're too deep, too automatic, too built in. But you can catch them in the act. You can notice the machinery running, and in that noticing, in that little half-second of friction you introduce on purpose, you get something most people never get. A choice. A chance to not just be carried along by your own wiring, but to actually steer it. And we're just getting started, because the deeper we go, the stranger this gets. And the effects coming up are even more twisted than the ones you've just met. So we just spent a whole stretch on how your brain gets tricked from the outside, by repetition, by crowds, by price tags. Now let's go somewhere a little more uncomfortable, because this next batch of effects isn't about how the world manipulates you. It's about how you manipulate yourself. How your own mind quietly rewrites your memories, lies to you about why you did things, and edits your past to protect your ego, all without ever telling you it's happening. And the wildest part? You'll swear up and down that none of it applies to you. That confidence you're feeling right now? Yeah, that's the first symptom. Let's start with something that sounds impossible until you see the proof. Your memories are not recordings. I know, it feels like they are. It feels like somewhere in your head there's a little video archive, and when you remember something, you press play and watch it back exactly as it happened. That's how memory feels from the inside. But that's not how it works at all. Here's the crazy part. Every single time you remember something, you're not playing back a recording. You're rebuilding it from scratch, reconstructing it from fragments. And every time you rebuild it, you can accidentally change it. You can add details that weren't there. You can drop details that were. And then you store the edited version, and that edited version becomes the new recording you'll rebuild from next time. Your memories are basically a game of telephone you're playing with yourself across your entire life. And the person who proved this in the most dramatic way possible is a researcher named Elizabeth Loftus, who spent decades demonstrating just how easy it is to plant a memory of something that never happened. Let me put you in one of her classic experiments. Picture this. You're a participant. They show you a video of a car accident. Just a quick clip. 2 cars, a collision. Then they ask you some questions about what you saw. But here's the trick, the sneaky genius of it. They ask different people the same question worded just slightly differently. One group gets asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Another group gets asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? Same video, same crash. The only difference is one word, hit versus smashed. And here's what happened. The people who heard smashed estimated the cars were going significantly faster than the people who heard hit. One word, and their memory of the speed shifted. But that's not even the punchline. The punchline comes a week later, when Loftus brought them back and asked a new question. Did you see any broken glass? Now, there was no broken glass in the video. None. But the people who had been asked the smashed version, the ones whose memories had been nudged toward a more violent crash, were way more likely to say yes, they remembered broken glass. Glass that never existed. Their brain had taken the suggestion baked into that one word, smashed, and quietly built it into the memory. It filled in the broken glass, because a violent smash should have broken glass, so surely there was glass, right? And now they genuinely remembered seeing it. The memory had been edited, and they had no idea. Let me explain why this should genuinely rattle you. Because Loftus didn't stop at tweaking the details of a real event. She went further and showed she could plant entire memories of things that never happened at all. In one famous line of research, she and her team convinced a meaningful chunk of people that as children, they had been lost in a shopping mall. They'd get the person's family to confirm some real childhood stories and then slip in a fake one, the getting lost in the mall story, presented as if a family member remembered it. And then they'd gently ask the person about it over a few sessions. And a striking number of people not only remembered being lost in the mall, they elaborated on it. They added details. They described how scared they felt, what the person who found them looked like, what they were thinking. Rich, vivid, emotional memories of an event that never, ever happened. Their brain manufactured an entire false experience, complete with feelings and sensory detail, just because it was suggested confidently and repeatedly. And once it was there, it felt exactly as real as any genuine memory. Now think about where this lands in the real world, because it's not just a lab curiosity. This is eyewitness testimony. This is the criminal justice system. For a long time, an eyewitness pointing at someone and saying, That's the person, I'm certain, I'll never forget that face, was treated as basically the gold standard of evidence. What's more convincing than someone who saw it with their own eyes? But Loftus's work, and a mountain of research after it, showed that eyewitness memory is shockingly unreliable and shockingly easy to contaminate. A leading question from a detective, a suggestive lineup, seeing a suspect's photo before the lineup, even just the passage of time and the retelling of the story, any of it can reshape the memory. And the person doesn't lie. They're not being dishonest. They genuinely believe their reconstructed, contaminated memory is the truth. That's what makes it so dangerous. The confidence is real. The certainty is real. The memory is wrong. People have been convicted, sent to prison on the strength of confident eyewitness memories that turned out to be flat wrong, and DNA evidence later proved it. The witness wasn't lying. Their own brain had lied to them. And here's the part that I want you to sit with for a second, because it's almost philosophical. The confidence you feel about a memory tells you almost nothing about whether it's accurate. Those mall memory people felt completely confident. The eyewitnesses felt completely confident. Confidence and accuracy are two separate things, and your brain refuses to keep them separate. A vividly remembered false memory feels exactly as solid, exactly as certain as a true one. You have no internal alarm that goes off and says, "Warning, this one's been edited." From the inside, the fake feels identical to the real. So that childhood memory you're so sure about, the one you've told 100 times, there's a real chance some of the details have drifted, or that the whole retelling has slowly sculpted it into a shape that's more story than fact. And you'd never know. You literally cannot tell from the inside. So how do you defend against your own memory betraying you? Honestly, the main defense is humility. Just knowing this changes how you hold your own certainty. When you're in an argument with someone about how an event went down and you're both completely sure, recognize that being sure doesn't make you right, and it doesn't make them lying. You might both be remembering edited versions. Write things down close to when they happen if they matter. Be suspicious of memories that have been retold a lot, because each retelling is a chance to edit. And maybe most importantly, be very, very careful about how confidently you accuse your own memory of being a perfect record, because it never was. It's a storyteller, not a stenographer, and the story changes with every telling. Now, speaking of your brain quietly editing reality to suit itself, let me introduce you to one of the most powerful and most disturbing forces in your entire mental life. Because once you see this one, you'll spot it operating in literally every human being around you, including, painfully, yourself. It's called cognitive dissonance, and it's the engine behind a staggering amount of human self-deception. Here's the basic idea. Your brain has a deep, almost desperate need to feel consistent. To feel like your beliefs, your actions, and your sense of who you are all line up into one coherent person. When two things in your head clash, when you do something that contradicts your beliefs, or hold two beliefs that can't both be true, it creates this uncomfortable mental tension. That tension is cognitive dissonance, and it feels bad. It feels like an itch in your brain, a low-grade distress, and your brain hates it so much that it will do almost anything to make the tension go away. Here's the twist, the part that makes this so sneaky. The most logical way to resolve the tension would be to change your behavior, right? If you do something that clashes with your values, just stop doing it, but that's hard. So instead, your brain very often takes the easier path. It changes your beliefs to justify the behavior you've already done. It rewrites your values to match your actions, rather than fixing your actions to match your values. And it does this without telling you. You just suddenly find yourself believing something new that conveniently makes you feel okay about what you did. Let me drop you into the experiment that nailed this down, because it's beautiful and a little ridiculous. The year is the 1950s. A researcher named Leon Festinger runs a study that becomes legendary. Picture this. You're a participant, and they have you do an absolutely mind-numbing, boring task. Turning little pegs on a board, over and over, for an hour. Tedious, pointless, soul-crushingly dull. Then when you're done, the experimenter asks you for a favor. They say the next participant is waiting, and they need you to go tell that person that the task was actually really fun and interesting. So you've got to lie. You've got to walk out there and tell a stranger that this horrible, boring task was a great time. And here's the variable. Some participants got paid a decent sum of money to tell the lie. Others got paid almost nothing, just a tiny amount, to tell the exact same lie. Now, which group do you think ended up actually believing the task was fun? Your gut probably says the people who got paid more, right? More reward, more positive feeling. Wrong. It was the opposite, and the reason is the whole point. The people who got paid a good amount of money to lie had an easy way to explain their behavior to themselves. Why did I tell that stranger the task was fun? Because they paid me. I did it for the money. No big deal. The money was a sufficient justification. There was no dissonance, no clash, because they had a clean, external reason for the lie. But the people who got paid almost nothing? They had a problem. They just lied to a stranger, said the task was fun, and they got basically nothing for it. So their brain is stuck with this clash. I'm an honest person, but I just told a lie, and I didn't even get paid enough to make it worth it. Why would I do that? That tension is unbearable, and so their brain resolves it the sneaky way. It rewrites the belief. Well, maybe the task wasn't that boring. Maybe it was actually kind of interesting. Yeah, I think I genuinely enjoyed parts of it. They literally changed their memory of how much they liked the task, retroactively, to justify a lie they told for almost nothing. They convinced themselves it had been fun, because that made the lie not a lie anymore. The smaller the external justification, the more they had to change their internal beliefs to cope. Let me explain why this is so important, because once you understand it, you understand a huge slice of human behavior that otherwise makes no sense. Cognitive dissonance is the reason people double down on bad decisions instead of admitting them. It's the reason someone who works incredibly hard to get into an exclusive, miserable group will then defend that group fiercely and insist it was all worth it, because admitting it wasn't worth it would mean facing the dissonance of all that suffering for nothing. The harder you work to get something, the more you have to believe it was valuable. Otherwise, the effort doesn't make sense. This is why brutal initiations create the most loyal members. The suffering gets converted into devotion because the brain cannot tolerate the idea that it suffered for no reason, so it manufactures the reason. This must be amazing. Look how much I sacrificed for it. And it's everywhere in your daily life, in ways you'd never flatter yourself to admit. You buy an expensive thing, and then you find yourself defending the purchase, talking up how great it is, dismissing the cheaper alternatives, because admitting you overpaid would create dissonance. You make a choice between two options, and the moment you choose, your brain starts inflating how great your choice was and finding flaws in the one you rejected, just to feel good about the decision. This even shows up in experiments. People rate a chosen item as more desirable after choosing it than they did before, purely to justify the choice they already made. You hold a belief, and when evidence comes in that contradicts it, instead of updating the belief, you find reasons to reject the evidence because the belief is part of your identity and changing it would hurt. That's dissonance reduction, your brain protecting its own consistency at the cost of the truth. Here's the genuinely unsettling part. You never feel like you're rationalizing. From the inside, it just feels like you're thinking clearly and arriving at the obvious correct conclusion. The rationalization is invisible to you. You don't experience it as, I'm bending my beliefs to justify what I did. You experience it as, I've thought about it and I've realized I was right all along. The whole machinery runs underneath your awareness, and it hands you a conclusion that feels like pure reason. That's what makes it so hard to fight. You can't catch yourself doing it in the moment because in the moment it doesn't feel like doing it. It feels like just thinking. So how do you defend against your own brain rationalizing reality on you? The defense is brutal because it requires the one thing the brain is desperately trying to avoid: sitting with the discomfort. When you feel that itch, that defensive flare-up, when someone challenges a decision you made or a belief you hold, and you feel that hot rush of, no, I need to defend this, that flare is the tell. That's dissonance. And instead of immediately reaching for the justification your brain is so helpfully offering you, you pause and ask the dangerous question: am I actually right here, or am I just protecting myself from being wrong? Being willing to say, you know what, I think I made a mistake, is one of the hardest things a human brain can do, precisely because it means tolerating the dissonance instead of dissolving it with a comfortable lie. But that willingness, that ability to sit in the discomfort of being wrong without instantly rewriting reality, that's basically the foundation of actually learning anything. The people who grow are the ones who can stand the itch. Now here's a thread worth pulling, because it connects beautifully to the next effect. Notice that with cognitive dissonance, you change your beliefs to explain your behavior. You did the thing first, and then your mind invented the reason afterward. Hold on to that idea, that your explanations for your own behavior often come after the behavior, not before, because it leads us straight into one of the most mind-bending facts about human consciousness there is. The fact that you don't actually know why you do most of the things you do. You just think you do. And your brain is constantly, fluently lying to you about your own motives. This shows up in something researchers call confabulation, and it is genuinely one of the eeriest things in all of psychology. Confabulation is when your brain confidently produces an explanation for your behavior that is completely false, but it does so with total sincerity. It's not lying in the sense of knowing the truth and hiding it. It's that the brain genuinely doesn't know the real reason, so it makes one up that feels right and presents it to you as fact. And you believe it because it's coming from inside your own head. So why wouldn't you? Let me give you the studies, because this is where it gets wild. There's a classic line of research where people are asked to choose between several items, say several pairs of stockings or several identical products laid out in a row. And people will pick one and then explain in detail why they chose it. Oh, this one's better quality. I liked the texture. The color seemed nicer. Confident, specific reasons. Here's the catch. The items were completely identical, exactly the same. There was no real difference between them to justify any of those reasons. And it turned out there was actually a position effect. People tended to pick the item on the right side more often, just because of where it was placed. But not a single person said, I picked it because it was on the right. They had no awareness of the real influence on their choice. Instead, their brain invented plausible-sounding reasons, the texture, the color, the quality, and served those up with total confidence. They confabulated. The real cause was hidden from them, and rather than say, I don't know why I picked this, their brain manufactured a reason on the spot. It gets even more dramatic in studies of people whose brain hemispheres have been surgically separated, the so-called split brain patients, where the connection between the left and right halves of the brain has been cut, usually to treat severe epilepsy. Researchers figured out clever ways to show information to just one half of the brain at a time. And in one famous setup, they'd flash an instruction to the right hemisphere, something like, walk, and the person would get up and start walking. Then they'd ask the person, why are you getting up? Now here's the thing. The talking, explaining part of the brain is mostly in the left hemisphere, and that left hemisphere had no idea about the walk instruction because that went to the right side, and the connection between them was cut. So the left hemisphere, the part doing the talking, genuinely did not know the real reason. Did it say, I don't know? Nope, it instantly made something up. Oh, I'm getting up to get a drink. Confident, smooth, totally false. The brain confabulated a reason for a behavior it had no access to the real cause of. And it didn't hesitate, didn't say, not sure. It just generated a plausible story and believed it. Let me explain what this implies, because it's honestly staggering. There's a part of your brain that acts like a press secretary, an interpreter, whose whole job is to generate explanations for your behavior and present a coherent story of you to yourself and the world. And this interpreter doesn't actually have access to most of the real causes of your behavior, which are happening in deeper, nonverbal, often unconscious parts of your brain. So a huge amount of the time, the interpreter is just making it up, constructing a sensible-sounding narrative after the fact. You do something for reasons you're not consciously aware of, and then your inner press secretary spins a story about why you did it, and you experience that story as the truth, as your genuine reason. But it's often a fiction, a plausible reconstruction, not a readout of the actual machinery. Think about how much that should humble you. When you explain why you fell in love with someone, why you chose your career, why you reacted the way you did in an argument, why you really voted the way you voted or bought the thing you bought, you feel like you're reporting facts about your own mind. But a lot of that is your interpreter spinning a tidy story over a process you didn't actually have access to. The real cause is your mood that day, some subtle cue you never consciously noticed, a bias operating below awareness, the position of the item on the shelf. Those stay hidden, and the story papers right over them. You are, to a startling degree, a stranger to yourself, narrating a life you only partly understand, and mistaking the narration for the truth. Now this connects right back to cognitive dissonance, doesn't it? Both of them involve your brain generating after-the-fact justifications and serving them to you as if they were the real reasons. Dissonance reduction rewrites your beliefs to fit your actions. Confabulation invents reasons for actions whose real causes you can't see. In both cases, the conscious, talking, explaining you is not the one in charge. It's the one cleaning up afterward and pretending it was driving the whole time. The press secretary doesn't make the policy. It just announces it and acts like it knew all along. So what do you do with this? You can't exactly turn off your own interpreter, and you wouldn't want to. It's a huge part of what makes you feel like a coherent person. But knowing it's there changes things. It means holding your own self-explanations a little more loosely. When you catch yourself confidently explaining exactly why you did something, you can add a quiet little asterisk. This is my best guess, my interpreter's story, not necessarily the literal truth. It makes you more curious about your own behavior instead of certain about it, and it makes you a lot more forgiving of other people too, because if you don't even reliably know your own real motives, you definitely don't know theirs, and neither do they. We're all walking around narrating ourselves, and the narration is partly fiction. Turns out, the most honest thing you can say about your own reasons is often, "I think, but I'm not totally sure." Now let me shift gears, because we've been deep in the machinery of self-deception, and I want to show you an effect that's a little more playful, but every bit as revealing about how your perception of yourself is warped. This one is about the gap between how good you think you are at something and how good you actually are. And it has one of the best names in all of psychology. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Here's the headline, and you've probably heard a fuzzy version of it. The basic idea is that people who are bad at something often don't realize they're bad at it, and in fact tend to overestimate their ability, sometimes wildly. And the reason is almost poetic. The very skills you need to be good at something are often the same skills you need to recognize that you're bad at it. So if you're genuinely incompetent at a task, you don't just lack the ability to do it well, you also lack the ability to see that you're doing it badly. You're missing the yardstick that would let you measure yourself. You're, in a sense, too unskilled to know you're unskilled. Let me put you in the original research, because it has a famously absurd backstory. The researchers, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, were partly inspired by a real story of a man who robbed banks with his face uncovered, in broad daylight, on camera, and was genuinely shocked when he got caught. Why was he shocked? Because he had heard that lemon juice could be used as invisible ink, and he had reasoned, with total confidence, that if he rubbed lemon juice on his face, it would make his face invisible to security cameras. He was so confident in this that he didn't even bother to hide. He was so incompetent at understanding how cameras and lemon juice work that he couldn't even perceive how incompetent his plan was. That spectacular, sincere overconfidence in the face of total cluelessness is the perfect emblem of the effect. So Dunning and Kruger ran proper experiments. They had people take tests on things like grammar, logical reasoning, even humor, judging which jokes were funny. And then they asked people to estimate how well they thought they'd done, how they ranked compared to everyone else. And here's the pattern they found. The people who actually scored the worst, the bottom performers, dramatically overestimated their performance. Someone who scored in the bottom small percentage might confidently rate themselves as well above average. They had no idea how badly they'd done, because the same lack of skill that tanked their score also blinded them to their own failure. They literally couldn't see the gap. But here's the part of the effect that people usually forget, and it's just as interesting. The flip side. The people who actually scored the best, the top performers, tended to underestimate their relative performance. They were genuinely skilled, but they often assumed the tasks were easy for everyone, that other people surely found it just as manageable as they did. They knew enough to know how much there was to know, so they were more humble about their standing. There's a related idea sometimes called imposter syndrome floating nearby here, where genuinely competent people feel like frauds. The competent doubt themselves, while the incompetent feel invincible, which is, when you think about it, a genuinely cruel arrangement. The people who should be most confident are racked with doubt, and the people who should be most cautious are strutting around certain of themselves. Now, I want to be fair and a little careful here, because the Dunning-Kruger effect is one of the most popular ideas in pop psychology, and it sometimes gets stretched way beyond what the research actually shows. It's not that incompetent people are uniquely delusional monsters while everyone else sees clearly. The deeper truth is about a general human difficulty with self-assessment, and the specific finding that the skills for doing and the skills for judging your doing are tangled together. The honest takeaway isn't, everyone dumber than me is an idiot who doesn't know it, which, ironically, is exactly the overconfident conclusion the effect should make you suspicious of. The honest takeaway is far more humbling. It might be you. Because the whole point is that you can't feel your own incompetence from the inside, by definition. If you could feel it, you'd be competent enough to fix it. So the very confidence you have in your own abilities is not reliable evidence that you're actually good. The feeling of competence and actual competence are, once again, two different things your brain refuses to keep separate. Let me explain why this matters for how you live, because it's not just a fun way to dunk on overconfident people, it's a tool for staying sharp. The most dangerous zone is right when you've learned a little bit about something. You take a few lessons, read a few articles, get the basics, and suddenly you feel like you understand the whole field. That's the peak of false confidence, the spot where you know just enough to feel like an expert and not enough to know how much you're missing. The deeper you actually go into any subject, the more you discover the vast oceans of stuff you don't know, and the more your confidence gets tempered by genuine understanding. So weirdly, a creeping sense of, oh wow, I actually know a lot less than I thought, is often a sign that you're getting more competent, not less. The humility is the growth showing up. So how do you defend against being the lemon juice guy without realizing it? The defense is to actively seek out the thing your brain doesn't want, which is honest, external feedback. You can't accurately judge yourself from the inside. The whole effect proves that. So you have to outsource the judgment. Get real feedback from people who actually know the subject. Compare your work to genuine experts, not to your own internal sense of how you did. Test yourself against reality instead of against your feelings. And cultivate the habit of asking, especially when you feel most confident, what would I need to know to realize I'm wrong about this? And have I actually checked? The feeling of certainty should be a prompt to investigate, not a license to stop thinking. Because the moment you feel like you've got something completely figured out is precisely the moment you should be most suspicious of yourself. Notice how this links back to everything we've covered. The illusory truth effect, where familiarity poses as truth. The memory work, where confidence poses as accuracy. Cognitive dissonance, where rationalization poses as reasoning. Confabulation, where invented stories pose as real motives. And now, Dunning-Kruger, where the feeling of competence poses as actual skill. There's one enormous theme running through this entire territory of the mind, and here it is. Your subjective feeling of certainty, your gut sense of, I'm right, I'm sure, I know this, is almost completely disconnected from whether you're actually right. Your brain generates that feeling of certainty for its own reasons, to keep you functioning, to keep you confident enough to act, to keep your sense of self stable. But it is not a truth detector. It never was. The feeling of being right and the state of actually being right are two separate things, and your brain has a powerful built-in habit of confusing them. And that, honestly, might be the single most useful thing to walk away with from this whole stretch. Because once you really internalize that your certainty is not evidence, everything changes about how you move through the world. You hold your beliefs a little more loosely. You stay curious instead of defensive. You check your memories against records. You seek feedback instead of basking in your own self-assessment. You give other people grace because you know they're as blind to their own machinery as you are to yours. You become, in a strange way, more powerful by becoming more humble. Because the person who knows the limits of their own mind can actually compensate for them, while the person who's certain just sails confidently into the rocks. Now, speaking of sailing into the rocks, let me take us into the next big territory. Because so far, we've mostly looked at how your mind deceives you about yourself, your memories, your reasons, your abilities. But there's a whole other set of effects about how your mind systematically misjudges the world out there, the risks, the odds, the probabilities, the patterns. Your brain comes loaded with a set of mental shortcuts for making fast judgments, and most of the time, those shortcuts are lifesavers. but each one of them has a predictable failure mode, a specific way it warps your view of reality. And once you know them, you start to see your own thinking glitch in real time. Let's start with one that quietly distorts basically everyone's sense of what's dangerous and what's safe. It's called the availability heuristic, and the idea is this. When your brain tries to judge how likely or how common something is, it doesn't run the actual statistics, because who has time for that? Instead, it takes a shortcut. It asks, how easily can I think of an example of this? And whatever comes to mind quickly and vividly, your brain treats as more common, more likely, more probable. Ease of recall stands in for actual frequency. If examples spring to mind easily, your brain goes, oh yeah, that happens a lot. If you struggle to think of an example, your brain goes, that's rare. Now, most of the time, that's a decent shortcut, because in everyday life, common things genuinely do come to mind more easily. But here's where it breaks, and breaks hard. Some things come to mind easily not because they're common, but because they're dramatic, scary, emotional, and heavily covered by news and media. And those things get massively overestimated in your mind. Let me put you in the classic example. Picture this. You're about to get on a plane, and you feel that flutter of fear, that little, what if it crashes, thought. Then later you climb into your car without a second thought, totally relaxed. But here's the thing. By the actual numbers, the drive to the airport is far more dangerous than the flight. Car accidents kill enormously more people than plane crashes. So why does the plane feel scarier? Because plane crashes are spectacular, rare, horrifying, and when they happen, they're plastered across every news channel for days. They come to mind instantly, vividly. Car crashes, despite being far deadlier in total, are so common and so mundane that they barely make the local news, so they don't come to mind with that same vivid punch. Your brain confuses easy to recall and emotionally vivid with likely to happen, and so it fears the safer thing and shrugs at the more dangerous one. This is the availability heuristic warping your entire sense of risk. It's why people are often more afraid of dramatic, rare dangers, shark attacks, terrorist incidents, kidnappings by strangers, than they are of the boring, statistically far more likely threats like heart disease from their daily habits, or car accidents, or falling in their own home. The dramatic stuff gets the media coverage. The media coverage makes it easy to recall, and the easy recall makes it feel common and imminent, even when the real numbers say it's vanishingly rare. Meanwhile, the genuinely high probability risks, the ones that quietly kill the most people, don't feel scary at all because they're mundane and don't generate vivid, easily recalled images. Your fear is calibrated to drama, not to danger. Here's the crazy part about how this gets exploited. Anyone who controls what you see frequently can control what your brain thinks is common. News media, by its nature, covers the rare and dramatic because the rare and dramatic is what's newsworthy. A plane that lands safely isn't news. A plane that crashes is. So the news, just by doing its job, systematically feeds you a diet of the rare and terrifying, which your availability heuristic then misreads as common and likely. You end up with a picture of the world that's wildly skewed toward dramatic dangers, not because anyone's necessarily lying to you, but because the structure of what gets reported, plus the shortcut in your brain, combine to distort reality. And people who want to scare you for clicks, for votes, for sales, understand this perfectly. Flood someone with vivid examples of a thing, and their brain will conclude that thing is everywhere, regardless of the actual numbers. Let me explain the defense, because it's genuinely practical. When you find yourself afraid of something, or convinced that something is common, pause and ask, am I basing this on actual data, or on how easily scary examples come to mind? Distinguish between, I can vividly picture this happening, and this is statistically likely to happen, because your brain glues those together and they are not the same. Go look at the real numbers when a decision actually matters, and be especially suspicious of any fear that's been fed to you by a stream of dramatic stories, because that's the availability heuristic being weaponized. The vividness of a threat tells you how memorable it is, not how probable it is. Once you separate those two, a huge amount of misplaced fear just dissolves, and you can aim your actual caution at the things that actually deserve it. And this pairs up perfectly with a cousin effect that distorts your judgment in the opposite direction by making you cling too hard to the first piece of information you receive. It's called anchoring, And it's so sneaky that it works even when you know it's happening, even when the anchor is completely random and irrelevant. The basic idea? When you're estimating some unknown number, the first number you encounter, the anchor, drags your estimate toward it, even if that first number has nothing to do with anything. Your brain grabs onto that initial value and then adjusts from there, but it never adjusts far enough. It stays tethered to the anchor. Let me give you the experiment, because it's almost comical how blatant the effect is. Researchers had people spin a wheel of fortune, a rigged wheel that landed on either a high number or a low number, totally random, obviously unrelated to anything meaningful. Then, right after, they asked people a totally unrelated question, like estimating what percentage of countries in the United Nations are African nations. And here's what happened. The people whose wheel had landed on a high number gave higher estimates. The people whose wheel landed on a low number gave lower estimates. A random spin of a wheel, a number everyone watched come up by pure chance, dragged their answer to a completely unrelated factual question. Their brains anchored on whatever number was floating in their head and adjusted from there, even though that number was meaningless. That's how powerful anchoring is. It works with numbers you know are random. Now think about where this gets used on you, on purpose, constantly. Pricing. The original price slashed with a line through it, sitting next to the sale price. That high original price is an anchor. It makes the sale price feel like a steal because your brain is measuring the deal against the anchor, not against what the thing is actually worth. The first number a salesperson throws out in a negotiation is an anchor, deliberately set high so that everything after it feels reasonable by comparison. The suggested amounts on a donation form, or the most expensive item on a menu that nobody buys, but which makes everything else look affordable, all anchors. Once that first number is in your head, every judgment you make afterward is quietly bent toward it, and you don't even feel the bending. You just feel like you're reasoning clearly about value, while a number someone planted is silently steering you. The defense against anchoring is hard, because it works even when you're aware of it, but awareness still helps. When you're about to make a judgment about value or quantity, try to notice what number got planted in your head first, and ask whether it actually means anything, or whether it was just placed there to influence you. In a negotiation, prepare your own independent sense of what's fair before you hear the other side's number, so you've got your own anchor to hold on to. When you see a slashed original price, try to ignore it entirely and ask, what is this thing actually worth to me? What would I pay if I'd never seen that crossed out number? You won't escape anchoring completely, nobody does, but generating your own reference point before someone hands you theirs is the closest thing to a shield there is. And look at the pattern forming again, because it's the same lesson wearing new clothes. The availability heuristic makes you misjudge how common things are based on how easily they come to mind. Anchoring makes you misjudge values based on whatever number landed first. Both are mental shortcuts that usually help and predictably fail, and both can be hijacked by anyone who controls your information environment. The news that floods you with vivid examples, the seller who plants the first price. Your judgment of the outside world is running on the same kind of automatic, exploitable machinery as your judgment of yourself. And the through line, the thing tying this entire journey together, is that you are not the cool, rational calculator you feel like you are. You're a brilliant, fast, shortcut-running creature whose shortcuts have predictable blind spots, and the single biggest advantage you can give yourself is knowing exactly where those blind spots are, so you can lean into the turn before you skid. And believe me, we are nowhere near done finding them. Okay, so we just spent a while on the shortcuts your brain uses to judge the world, and how they quietly betray you. Now I want to drag you into the territory that I think is genuinely the most uncomfortable of all. Because this next stretch isn't about how your mind glitches in private. It's about how other people, and the situations they put you in, can reach into your head and bend you into doing things you would swear, hand on heart, you'd never do. You're a good person, right? You'd resist. You'd refuse. You'd walk out. Yeah, everyone thinks that. And the experiments we're about to walk through are famous precisely because they proved how wrong that confidence usually is. Let's start with the big, dark, legendary one. It's called the Milgram obedience experiments, and the question Milgram was chasing was one of the heaviest questions a person can ask. He ran these in the early 1960s, in the shadow of the Second World War, when the whole world was wrestling with how ordinary people, regular citizens, had participated in atrocities. The easy answer was, Those people were monsters, evil, different from us. Milgram suspected something far scarier. He suspected that ordinary, decent people, under the right pressure from authority, could be led to do horrific things. And he built an experiment to test it. Let me put you right in the room, because the setup is genius and chilling. Picture this. You've answered an ad to take part in a study about memory and learning at a prestigious university. You show up. There's a man in a lab coat, calm, official, clearly the authority figure. And there's another participant, a friendly, middle-aged guy. You draw slips of paper to decide your roles. You become the teacher. The other guy becomes the learner. What you don't know is that the other guy is an actor, in on the whole thing, and the draw was rigged so you'd always be the teacher. The learner gets taken into another room and, you're told, hooked up to electrodes. Your job, as the teacher, is to read him word pairs to memorize, then test him. And every time he gets one wrong, you have to give him an electric shock. And here's the kicker. With each wrong answer, you increase the voltage. The shock generator in front of you has a long row of switches, climbing from a mild 15 volts all the way up to a final, terrifying 450 volts, with labels getting scarier as they climb, all the way to a final cluster marked simply with an ominous XXX. So the experiment begins. The learner starts making mistakes. You start delivering shocks, climbing the dial. And as the voltage rises, the learner, in the next room, starts to react. At first, grunts. Then, as it climbs, he complains. Then he cries out in pain. He bangs on the wall. He mentions he has a heart condition. He begs you to stop. He demands to be let out. And then, at the highest levels, he goes completely silent, which is somehow worse, because now you don't even know if he's okay. Remember, it's all an act. There are no real shocks. The learner is a safe actor playing a recording. But you, the teacher, don't know that. As far as you're concerned, you might be electrocuting a man to death over a memory test. And here's where the authority comes in. Every time you hesitate, every time you turn to the man in the lab coat and say, "I don't think I should keep going. He's in pain. Maybe we should stop," the experimenter responds, calmly, flatly, with a series of scripted prods. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. No threats, no force. Just a calm authority figure in a lab coat telling you to keep going. Now, before Milgram ran this, he asked experts, psychiatrists, to predict what would happen. How many people, they were asked, would go all the way to the maximum, the 450 volts, the lethal-looking XXX switch, just because a man in a lab coat told them to? The experts predicted almost nobody, a tiny fraction of a percent, only the rare pathological few. That was the confident prediction. Surely ordinary people would refuse. Surely they'd walk out the moment a man cried out in pain. Here's the crazy part. The result that made this experiment echo for decades. Around 65% of participants, roughly 2 out of every 3 ordinary people, went all the way to the maximum voltage. They kept flipping switches, past the screaming, past the begging, past the heart condition please, past the terrifying silence, all the way to the final, lethal-looking shock. Not because they were monsters, not because they wanted to hurt anyone. Most of them were visibly distressed, sweating, trembling, protesting, begging the experimenter to check on the learner, and then continuing anyway, because the authority told them to. Let me explain what's actually going on here, because it's so important to get right. This is not a story about how people are secretly evil and just need an excuse. The participants did not want to do this. They suffered while doing it. The horror of the finding isn't that people are bloodthirsty, it's the opposite. It's that ordinary, reluctant, decent people who would never choose to hurt someone on their own can be walked step by step into doing exactly that by a legitimate-seeming authority. Milgram talked about a shift into what he called the agentic state, where a person stops seeing themselves as the author of their own actions and starts seeing themselves as merely the instrument of someone else's will. I was just doing what I was told. It wasn't my responsibility, it was his. He was in charge. The responsibility gets handed up the chain to the authority, and the person becomes a tool, an agent, executing orders while feeling strangely absolved of the consequences. And notice the gradualness, because this is one of the most insidious parts. Nobody asked these people, right at the start, will you electrocute a man to death? If they had, everyone would have said no, obviously. Instead, it started with a tiny, harmless 15-volt shock. Trivial. Then a slightly bigger one. Then a little bigger. Each step was only a small increment past the last one. And at no single point was there an obvious bright line, a moment where it suddenly went from fine to monstrous. The escalation was so gradual that backing out at any given step would mean admitting that the previous step was already wrong, which is its own kind of dissonance. So people kept inching forward, one small switch at a time, until they were somewhere they never would have agreed to go in one leap. That's how you boil a person into doing the unthinkable, not with one big ask, but with a staircase of tiny ones. Now, Milgram also ran a whole pile of variations, and these are crucial because they show what actually moves the dial, what makes obedience go up or down. When the experimenter gave orders by phone instead of being physically present in the room, obedience dropped a lot. The physical presence of authority matters. When the experiment was moved out of the prestigious university into a rundown office building, obedience dropped. The perceived legitimacy and prestige of the setting matters. When the teacher had to physically force the learner's hand onto a shock plate, making the harm more direct and undeniable, obedience dropped. Distance from the consequences matters. And here's maybe the most hopeful one. When there were other teachers in the room, also actors, who refused and walked out, obedience collapsed dramatically. When even one other person modeled defiance, suddenly the real participant found the courage to refuse too. The presence of a single rebel ally breaks the spell. And that last finding is your defense, basically. Because the lesson of Milgram is not just the bleak, people obey authority. It's also the practical question of how you become one of the ones who don't. First, awareness itself helps. Knowing that the pressure to obey is this strong, this real, this capable of overriding your own conscience, lets you recognize it when it's happening to you. Second, watch for the gradual staircase, the slow escalation where each step seems only slightly worse than the last, because that's the mechanism that walks good people off a cliff. The defense is to evaluate each step against your actual values, not against the previous step. And third, be the rebel ally for other people, because your defiance gives others permission to defy too. One person standing up can break the whole room out of the spell. The agentic state, that sense of, I'm just following orders, it's not on me, is a trap. And the way out is to grab the responsibility back, to remind yourself that you are always the author of your own actions, no matter who's giving the orders. Now, speaking of how situations transform ordinary people, there's a companion to Milgram that's just as famous and even more dramatic, though it comes with some serious controversy attached, and I want to be honest with you about that. It's the Stanford Prison Experiment, run by Philip Zimbardo in the early 1970s. Here's the setup. Zimbardo took a group of ordinary, psychologically healthy young men, college students, and screened them to make sure they were normal, stable, no red flags. Then he randomly assigned them to one of two roles. Half became guards, half became prisoners, and he built a mock prison in the basement of a university building, with cells, uniforms, the whole thing. The prisoners were arrested at their homes, brought in, stripped of their names and given numbers, dressed in smocks. The guards got uniforms, mirrored sunglasses to hide their eyes, and batons. The plan was to run it for 2 weeks and watch what happened when you put normal people into the roles of guard and prisoner. And the story, as it's been told for decades, is that it spiraled out of control terrifyingly fast. The guards, supposedly, became cruel and abusive within days, inventing humiliating punishments, dehumanizing the prisoners, pushing them psychologically. The prisoners, supposedly, became passive, broken, some having emotional breakdowns. The whole thing got so intense that the experiment, planned for 2 weeks, was shut down after only 6 days. And the conclusion that got drawn, the one that made this experiment legendary, was huge and sweeping. That the situation, the roles, the environment can transform ordinary good people into tyrants and victims. That it's not about bad apples, it's about the barrel. That put a normal person in a position of unchecked power over others, and they'll abuse it, almost automatically. Now here's where I have to be straight with you. Because this is important, and it ties right back to the very first thing we talked about in this whole journey, the way repeated claims become accepted as truth. The Stanford Prison Experiment has been heavily criticized in recent years, and a lot of the dramatic story doesn't hold up the way it's been told. Investigations into the original recordings and documents revealed some serious problems. The guards weren't just spontaneously turning cruel on their own. In some cases, they appear to have been coached or encouraged toward harshness, told the kind of atmosphere the experimenters wanted. Some of the prisoners' breakdowns have been questioned, with at least one famously claiming later that he was partly acting. The experiment had no proper control. It wasn't a clean scientific test. It was more like an intense piece of improvised theater that the experimenter himself was deeply involved in directing, even taking on a role within it. So the tidy conclusion, the situation automatically turns good people evil, rests on much shakier ground than the famous story suggests. And I'm telling you this on purpose, because it's a perfect real-world example of the illusory truth effect in action, the very first thing we covered. The dramatic version of the Stanford prison experiment got repeated so many times, in textbooks, documentaries, articles, classrooms, for decades, that it became common knowledge, something everybody knew was true. And the repetition made it feel rock solid, unquestionable. But repetition isn't evidence. Even a famous scientific-sounding story can be flawed and get propped up purely by being told over and over until questioning it feels weird. So the real lesson of the Stanford prison experiment might be the opposite of the one it's famous for. Not situations automatically turn us into monsters, but be careful what you accept as established fact just because you've heard it 1,000 times, even in science. The truth is more nuanced. Situations and roles absolutely do shape behavior powerfully. Milgram showed that with far better methodology. But the cartoonish, power instantly corrupts everyone version is more story than science. Let me explain why I bothered taking you through both the famous version and the criticism, instead of just telling you one or the other. Because it models the exact mental move this entire journey is about. Hold the interesting claim and hold the skepticism at the same time. Don't just swallow the dramatic story because it's vivid and gets repeated, and don't just dismiss everything because part of it was flawed. Sit in the nuance. The situation matters, and the famous experiment was messier than the legend. Both true. That ability to hold complexity without collapsing into either blind belief or total cynicism is genuinely one of the rarest and most valuable mental skills there is. Now, let's pivot to something a bit lighter in tone, but every bit as revealing about how the social world warps your individual mind. Because it's not just authority figures and prison roles that bend you. It's the simple, everyday presence of other people having opinions. And the experiment that nailed this is one of the cleanest, most elegant demonstrations in all of psychology. It's called the Asch conformity experiments, run by Solomon Asch in the 1950s. Here's the setup, and it's beautifully simple. Picture this. You're in a room with a group of other people, supposedly all fellow participants in a study about visual perception. The experimenter shows everyone a card with a single line on it, then a second card with 3 lines of different lengths, labeled 1, 2, and 3. And the task is laughably easy. Just say which of the 3 lines matches the length of the first line. It's obvious. A child could do it. There's a clearly correct answer. The lines aren't even close. You can tell at a glance which one matches. Going around the room, each person says their answer out loud. And here's the trick, the thing you don't know. Everyone else in the room is an actor, in on it. You're the only real participant, and they've seated you near the end, so you answer after hearing most of the others. The first few rounds, everyone gives the obvious correct answer, and so do you, no problem. But then, on certain rounds, something bizarre happens. The first actor confidently gives a clearly wrong answer, a line that obviously doesn't match. And you think, that's weird, did they not see it right? Then the second actor gives the same wrong answer, and the third, and the fourth. One by one, every single person in the room confidently states an answer that you can plainly see is wrong. And now it's your turn. The evidence of your own eyes is screaming the correct answer at you. But every other human in the room just said something different. So what do? Here's the crazy part. A significant chunk of people, when faced with that unanimous wrong crowd, abandoned the evidence of their own eyes and gave the wrong answer too. They conformed. Across the experiment, A large majority of participants conformed to the obviously incorrect group answer at least once, and a meaningful fraction did it consistently. People denied what was right in front of their face, denied plain physical reality, rather than be the lone voice disagreeing with the group. Over a line on a card. Not a matter of opinion, not a tricky judgment call, a flat, obvious, visual fact. And they caved because the social pressure of being the odd one out was stronger than the truth their own eyes were reporting. Let me explain the two different things going on here, because Ash and others dug into why people conformed, and it splits into two flavors. Some people conformed because they genuinely started to doubt themselves. They thought, well, everyone else sees it differently. Maybe I'm the one who's wrong. Maybe there's something off with my perception. That's called informational conformity. You treat the group as a source of information about reality, and you update toward them. But a lot of people conformed, even though they privately knew the group was wrong. They could see the right answer perfectly well, but they went along anyway, purely to avoid the discomfort of standing out, of being the weirdo, of facing the social friction of disagreeing. That's called normative conformity. You conform not because you believe the group, but because you don't want to be rejected by it. And that second one is, in a way, more unsettling, because it means people will say things they know are false just to fit in. They'll publicly betray their own perception to keep the social peace. And just like with Milgram, Ash ran variations that show what cracks the spell. And the most important one is the same hopeful finding. When even one other person in the room, just one, broke from the group and gave the correct answer, conformity plummeted. The presence of a single ally, one other person willing to say, no, it's clearly line 2, was enough to free the real participant to trust their own eyes and speak the truth. You don't need a majority on your side. You need one other dissenter, one person to break the illusion of unanimity, and suddenly standing up becomes possible. It's the lonely unanimity that crushes you. Crack it even slightly, and you can breathe. Think about what this means for your actual life, because this isn't just about lines on cards. This is happening to you all the time, in subtler forms. In meetings, where everyone seems to agree on a bad idea and you stay quiet because who are you to be the lone objector? In groups of friends, where an opinion takes hold and disagreeing feels socially expensive. In whole societies, where certain beliefs become the consensus and questioning them out loud feels dangerous, not because you'd be physically harmed, but because of that deep, ancient terror of being cast out from the group. Your brain treats social rejection as a genuine threat, because for most of human history, being expelled from your tribe was a death sentence. So you're wired to conform, wired to go along, wired to swallow your own perception rather than risk standing alone. And that wiring, which kept your ancestors alive and inside the protective group, can today make you complicit in collective mistakes, silent in the face of obvious wrongs, just nodding along with the line that's plainly the wrong length. So how do you defend against this one? First, just knowing about it gives you a name for that pressure you feel when you want to disagree, but the whole room seems aligned against you. That's squirmy reluctance. That's normative conformity pulling at you, and naming it weakens it. Second, remember the power of being the one ally. If you speak up, you might not just save yourself, you might free everyone else in the room who privately agreed with you but was too scared to be first. Your courage is contagious, the same way silence is. And third, when you're the one running a group, actively make space for dissent, ask for objections, reward the person who disagrees, because the unanimous seeming agreement in front of you might be a room full of people all privately seeing line 2 and all too scared to say it. The scariest thing about the Ash experiment isn't that people are weak. It's that the wrongness was unanimous and confident, and unanimity is a kind of spell. Break it, and the truth comes flooding back. Now notice the thread running through this whole social stretch, because it's powerful. Milgram showed authority can override your conscience. The prison experiment, even in its messier reality, showed roles and situations shape behavior. Ash showed the mere opinions of a crowd can override the evidence of your own eyes. And in every single one of these, there's the same liberating escape hatch, the rebel ally. The one disobedient teacher who breaks Milgram's spell. The one dissenter who breaks Ash's spell. Over and over, the research says the same thing. The pressure of the group, of authority, of conformity is enormous, but it is fragile in a specific way. It depends on the appearance of unanimity, on you feeling alone. And the instant that illusion of everyone agrees, everyone's going along, I'm the only one, gets cracked, even by a single other person, your power to resist comes rushing back. Which means two things. You are far more susceptible to social pressure than your confident self wants to believe. And you have far more power than you realize. Because by being the first to break ranks, you can hand everyone else around you their freedom too. Now let me take us somewhere related, but more intimate, because so far we've talked about how crowds and authorities bend you. But there's a whole science of how individuals influence each other, one-on-one. The subtle psychological levers that make you say yes when you meant to say no. These are the principles of persuasion and influence, and a lot of them were mapped out and popularized by the researcher Robert Cialdini, who actually went undercover, taking jobs in sales and marketing and fundraising to learn the tricks of professional persuaders from the inside. And what he found is a set of buttons in the human mind that, when pressed, reliably produce compliance. Let me walk you through some of the big ones, because once you see them, you'll catch them being pressed on you everywhere. The first big one is reciprocity. This is deep, ancient wiring. When someone gives you something, does you a favor, you feel a powerful, almost physical urge to give something back, to return the favor, to not be in their debt. This rule of reciprocity held human societies together. It's the basis of cooperation, of trade, of trust. But it can be hijacked. Let me put you in the scene. You're walking through an airport, and someone from a group hands you a small flower, or a little gift, presses it into your hand. Here, this is for you, a gift. And now you've accepted it, and you feel that itch, that obligation. And then they ask for a donation. And suddenly it's really hard to say no, because they gave you something, and your reciprocity wiring is screaming that you owe them. That free sample at the store, that little unexpected gift, the salesperson who does you a small favor before the pitch, all of it is priming the reciprocity button. They give you a small thing to trigger your urge to give a bigger thing back. There's even a version called the door-in-the-face technique, where someone makes a huge, unreasonable request that you obviously refuse, and then immediately follows it with a smaller, more reasonable request. And because they backed down and made a concession, your reciprocity wiring makes you feel like you should concede too, and meet them with a yes. The smaller request, which you might have refused on its own, now feels like a fair compromise. The second big lever is commitment and consistency. Humans have a deep need to be and to appear consistent with what they've previously said and done. Once you commit to something, especially out loud or in writing, you feel pressure to act in line with that commitment, even when it no longer serves you. This is the basis of the foot in the door technique, the mirror image of door in the face. Here, someone gets you to agree to a tiny, trivial request first. Then later, a bigger request. And because you already said yes to the small thing, and you want to stay consistent with the kind of person who says yes to this, you're far more likely to agree to the big thing. Get someone to put a small sign in their window, and later, they're more willing to put a huge ugly one on their lawn, because they've already committed to being the kind of person who supports the cause. Every time a salesperson gets you to agree to a series of small yeses, they're building a staircase of commitment, and each step makes the next yes easier, because backing out would mean being inconsistent, and your brain hates that. The third lever we actually touched on way back at the start, social proof. When people are uncertain about what to do, they look to what others are doing and copy it. We covered the dark side of this with the bystander effect and the smoke-filled room. Everyone's staying calm because everyone else seems calm. But it's used constantly to influence you on purpose. Best-selling, most popular. Join the millions who've already signed up. 9 out of 10 people choose this. Lines at restaurants that make the place seem desirable. Fake reviews and inflated follower counts. All of it is pressing the social proof button, telling your brain, lots of other people are doing this, so it must be the right thing to do, so you should do it too. Your brain treats the crowd's behavior as evidence, and when you're uncertain, that evidence is incredibly persuasive, even when the crowd is manufactured or paid for. The fourth is authority, which Milgram already taught us is terrifyingly powerful. People defer to perceived authority, to experts, to uniforms, to titles, to symbols of expertise and status. And the unsettling part is that often it's the mere symbols of authority that do the work, not real expertise. A lab coat, a fancy title, a confident tone, a suit. An actor playing a doctor in an advertisement. I'm not a doctor, but I play one. Your brain takes the symbol as a shortcut for trustworthiness and lowers its guard. Con artists understand this perfectly. Dress the part, project confidence, flash a credential, and people stop scrutinizing. The fifth lever is liking. It's almost embarrassingly simple. We are far more easily persuaded by people we like. And we tend to like people who are attractive, who are similar to us, who pay us compliments, who seem familiar, who cooperate with us toward shared goals. Salespeople are trained to find common ground with you, to mirror you, to compliment you, to seem like your friend, because the more you like them, the more your guard drops, and the more likely you are to say yes. Those parties where someone sells you kitchenware or candles through a friend, that's liking weaponized. You're not really buying from a salesperson, you're buying from your friend, and saying no feels like rejecting them personally. And the sixth big one is scarcity. We want things more when they're rare, limited, or about to disappear. Opportunities feel more valuable when they're scarce. Limited time only. Only 3 left in stock. Offer ends tonight. Exclusive. The fear of missing out is a powerful motivator, and scarcity, real or manufactured, triggers it. When something seems like it's slipping away, your brain panics and reframes it as more desirable, and you grab it before you've really thought it through. That ticking countdown timer on a website, that only a few rooms left at this price warning, those are scarcity buttons, engineered to short-circuit your careful thinking and trigger an impulsive grab. Let me explain why understanding these 6 is so genuinely empowering. Because individually, none of them feels like manipulation. Reciprocity feels like gratitude. Consistency feels like integrity. Social proof feels like reasonable caution. Authority feels like sensible deference. Liking feels like friendship. Scarcity feels like smart urgency. Each one is rooted in something real and usually healthy. These are shortcuts that genuinely serve you most of the time. That's exactly why they work as manipulation tools, because they hijack good instincts. The professional persuader isn't installing something foreign in you. They're pressing buttons that are already there, buttons that usually help you, and steering them toward their goal instead of yours. The defense isn't to become a cold, suspicious person who trusts nobody and feels no gratitude. The defense is to learn to ask, in the moment when you feel pulled toward a yes, wait, am I saying yes because this is genuinely good for me, or because someone just pressed one of these buttons? Did they give me a gift to make me feel obligated? Am I about to agree just to stay consistent with something trivial I said earlier? Is this everyone's doing it actually meaningful, or just manufactured? Is this authority real expertise, or just a costume? Do I like this person in a way that's clouding my judgment about the actual offer? Is this scarcity real, or is it a countdown timer designed to make me panic? That little pause, that moment of stepping back and naming which button is being pressed, breaks the automatic pull. It's the same defense we keep coming back to throughout this entire journey. Introduce friction, name the machinery, reclaim the choice. Because the whole power of these techniques comes from operating below your awareness, from feeling like your own natural, reasonable response, rather than an engineered nudge. Drag them up into the light, name them, and they lose most of their grip. The manipulator's greatest weapon is your assumption that you're immune, that you're too smart, too independent to be influenced by such simple tricks. And just like the people who confidently predicted they'd never flip Milgram switches, or the participants certain they'd never deny the obvious line on Ash's card, that confidence is exactly the thing that leaves you wide open. The first step to actually being harder to manipulate is admitting fully that you can be manipulated, that these buttons are real and they're in you, and then learning, one by one, exactly where they are and when someone's reaching for them. Okay, so we've gone deep into how the world bends you, how crowds and authorities and salespeople press the buttons hidden in your head. Now let me bring it all the way home, into the most personal territory of all, the stuff happening inside you that shapes how you feel, what you want, and how you treat the people you love. Because the same machinery that lets a stranger sell you a kitchen gadget is running in your friendships, your relationships, your sense of who you are. And honestly, some of these last ones are the most beautiful and the most quietly devastating of the whole bunch. Let's start with one that explains a maddening amount of human behavior, including, if you're honest, a fair bit of your own. It's called the fundamental attribution error, and it is the single most reliable way that you misjudge other people every single day without ever noticing you're doing it. Here's the core of it. When someone else does something, you tend to explain it by their character, their personality, who they are as a person. When you do the exact same thing, you tend to explain it by the situation, the circumstances, what was going on around you. Same behavior, two completely different explanations, depending on whether it's them or you. Let me put you in the scene, because you've lived this 100 times. Picture this. You're driving, and someone cuts you off in traffic, swerves right in front of you. What's your instant gut reaction? What a jerk. What a reckless, selfish idiot. You explain their behavior with their character. They're a bad driver, a bad person. Now flip it. Later that same day, you cut someone off. But you've got a reason. You were running late for something important, or you didn't see them, or the sun was in your eyes, or there was an emergency. You explain your own identical behavior with the situation. You're not a jerk. You just had circumstances. See the asymmetry? When they do it, it's who they are. When you do it, it's what was happening to you. That's the fundamental attribution error, and it's running constantly, coloring how you judge literally everyone around you. Let me explain why your brain does this, because there's an actual reason, and it's kind of obvious once you see it. When you watch someone else act, what's the most visible, vivid thing in front of you? The person. They're the focus, they're center stage, the situation is just background. So you naturally attribute the behavior to the most salient thing, which is them. But when you act, you can't see yourself. What you're vividly aware of is the situation around you, all the pressures and reasons and circumstances bearing down on you. So you naturally attribute your own behavior to the situation, because that's what fills your field of view. It's literally a difference in perspective, in what's visible from where you're standing. You see other people's actions, but not their pressures. You feel your own pressures, but can't see yourself acting. And here's the crazy part. This isn't a minor little quirk. It poisons your relationships and your judgment in deep ways. It's why you're so quick to think a coworker is lazy when they miss a deadline, instead of considering they might be drowning in problems you can't see. It's why you assume the person who snapped at you is just a nasty person, rather than someone having the worst day of their life. It's why we judge whole groups of people harshly for behaviors that, if we did them ourselves, we'd explain away with circumstances in a heartbeat. The fundamental attribution error makes you a harsh, uncharitable judge of others and a generous, forgiving lawyer for yourself. Everyone else's failures are character flaws. Your own failures are just bad luck and tough situations. So how do you defend against it? How do you fight a bias this automatic? The defense is something people sometimes call charitable interpretation, or just plain empathy with a mechanism behind it. When someone does something that annoys you or disappoints you, before you slap a character label on them, deliberately ask, what situation might be causing this? What pressures might they be under that I can't see? Give them the same benefit of the doubt you instinctively give yourself, because you know, for an absolute fact, that your own bad behavior usually has reasons behind it. Situations, pressures, off days. And the honest truth is that other people's bad behavior usually does too. You just can't see their situation the way you can see your own. Flipping that around, deliberately imagining the invisible situation behind someone else's action doesn't just make you kinder, it makes you more accurate, because most of the time, the situation really is a bigger driver than character. Which, if you remember, connects right back to those obedience and conformity experiments, where ordinary people did terrible things not because of who they were, but because of the situation they were placed in. The whole arc keeps teaching the same lesson. Situations shape behavior far more than we want to believe. Now, speaking of how your mind shapes your experience, let me hit you with one that explains why you're never quite as happy as you expect to be, and never quite as miserable for as long as you fear. It's called the hedonic treadmill, sometimes hedonic adaptation, and it's one of the most important things you can understand about your own happiness. Here's the idea. No matter what happens to you, good or bad, you tend to return, over time, to roughly your baseline level of happiness. You adapt. The good thing stops feeling so good, the bad thing stops feeling so bad, and you drift back to about where you started. Let me put you in the scene. Picture this. You're convinced that if you just get the thing, the raise, the new car, the bigger house, the dream gadget, you'll finally be happy. And you get it. And for a while, yes, you are happier. There's a genuine spike of joy. But here's the brutal part. The spike fades. Faster than you'd ever expect. Within weeks or months, the new car is just your car. The bigger house is just your house. The raise is just your normal salary, and now you've got new expenses to match it. The thing that was supposed to make you permanently happier got absorbed into your new normal, your baseline reset, and you're standing there, about as happy as you were before, already eyeing the next thing. That's the treadmill. You keep running, keep acquiring, keep chasing, but you stay in roughly the same emotional place, because adaptation keeps moving the finish line. There's research that points at this in dramatic ways. The famous, often cited examples involve looking at people who experienced enormous life changes and finding that over time, their happiness levels tended to drift back toward where they'd been before. People who won large sums of money after the initial thrill often adapted back toward their previous baseline and sometimes found that everyday small pleasures gave them less joy than before because the giant windfall had recalibrated what good felt like. And on the flip side, the genuinely hopeful side, people who suffered serious misfortunes, even severe ones, often adapted far better than anyone would predict, recovering much of their previous happiness over time, proving more resilient than they ever would have imagined. The same machinery that steals the lasting joy from your wins also protects you from being permanently crushed by your losses. Adaptation cuts both ways. It's why your worst fears about how devastated you'd be by some setback are usually overblown. You're tougher and more adaptable than you think. Let me explain why this matters so much, because it's not just a depressing, nothing makes you happy message. It's actually a roadmap. Once you understand the hedonic treadmill, you understand why chasing more stuff, more status, more bigger and better is largely a trap. You adapt to all of it. The treadmill speeds up to match. But, and this is the key, not everything adapts equally. Some sources of well-being resist adaptation much better than others. You adapt fast to material possessions and to a higher income, but you adapt much more slowly, if at all, to things like strong relationships, to a sense of meaning and purpose, to experiences and growth, to gratitude practiced deliberately. The treadmill flattens the joy of the new phone almost instantly, but the warmth of deep connection with people you love, the satisfaction of work that matters to you, the richness of novel experiences, those tend to keep giving. So the practical defense isn't to stop wanting things, it's to aim your wanting at the things that don't get swallowed by adaptation. Invest in relationships and experiences and meaning, not in a parade of possessions you'll adapt to in a month. And practice gratitude on purpose, because deliberately noticing and savoring what you already have is one of the few known ways to partly defeat the treadmill, to refresh your appreciation for things you'd otherwise adapt right past. Turns out, the secret isn't getting more, it's wanting differently, and learning to actually feel the good things you already have before adaptation steals them. Now let me take you into a pair of effects about how you misjudge yourself across time, because this is where so much regret and so much wasted effort comes from. The first is the sunk cost fallacy, and you've definitely fallen for it. The idea is this: you keep investing in something, time, money, effort, just because you've already invested so much in it, even when continuing makes no sense anymore. The rational thing is to make decisions based on the future, on what's best going forward. But your brain hates the feeling of waste, of having thrown away what you already put in. So it keeps you locked in, throwing good resources after bad, just to avoid admitting the original investment was a loss. Let me put you in it. Picture this: you're at a movie, and 40 minutes in, it's clearly terrible. Boring, bad, you're not enjoying it at all. Do you leave? Most people don't. Why? Well, I already paid for the ticket. I'm already here. Might as well stay and get my money's worth. But think about that for a second. It's completely backwards. The money's already gone. You can't get it back whether you stay or leave. That's the sunk cost. Staying doesn't recover it. All staying does is cost you an additional 2 hours of your life watching something you hate. The rational move is to walk out and go do something you'd actually enjoy. But the feeling of, I already invested, I can't waste it, chains you to your seat. And that exact same trap, scaled up, keeps people in dead-end jobs they've put years into, in relationships that stopped working long ago because they've already invested so much time, in failing projects and businesses they keep pouring money into because they can't bear to admit the previous money was lost. The more you've sunk into something, the harder it gets to walk away, even when walking away is obviously the right call. The past investment, which should be irrelevant to the future decision, becomes the very thing trapping you. The defense is a clean mental trick. When you're deciding whether to continue something, deliberately ignore everything you've already put in. It's gone. It's spent. It counts for nothing in this decision, and ask only one question. Knowing what I know now, if I were starting fresh today, would I choose to begin this? If the answer is no, that's your signal. The years you've already spent, the money already gone, the effort already burned. None of it should keep you locked into a future that doesn't serve you. It's painful because it means consciously accepting the loss, sitting in that discomfort, which, if you remember, is exactly the same skill we talked about with cognitive dissonance. The willingness to say, I was wrong, and eat the bad feeling instead of rationalizing your way deeper into the hole. The people who can cut their losses cleanly, who can walk out of the bad movie, who can leave the dead-end path, are the ones who don't spend their whole lives trapped by their own past investments. And this pairs with a cousin that warps your decisions the other direction, called loss aversion, which sits at the heart of a whole body of work on how people actually make choices under risk. The core finding is startling in its simplicity. Losses hurt more than equivalent gains feel good. The pain of losing something is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the same thing. Losing a certain amount of money hurts you roughly twice as much as finding that same amount would delight you. The two are not balanced. The downside looms much larger in your mind than the matching upside. Let me put you in a simple version. Picture this. Someone offers you a coin flip. Heads, you win 100. Tails, you lose 100. Fair odds, even money. Do you take it? Most people say no, absolutely not. The thought of losing 100 feels worse than the thought of winning 100 feels good. So the bet feels like a bad deal, even though it's mathematically neutral. In fact, to get most people to accept a 50-50 coin flip where they could lose 100, you usually have to offer them a potential win of close to 200 or more, roughly double, before the gain feels big enough to be worth risking the loss. That ratio, that roughly 2-to-1, is loss aversion quantified. The fear of losing is about twice as loud as the joy of winning. Let me explain how this distorts your life and how it gets used against you. Loss aversion is why you'll hold on to a losing investment, hoping it comes back, rather than sell and accept the loss, because realizing the loss hurts too much, so you'd rather gamble than feel that specific pain. It's why don't miss out and don't lose your chance marketing works so well. Framing something as a potential loss is far more motivating than framing it as a potential gain. It's why free trials that auto-renew are so effective. Once you have the thing, giving it up feels like a loss, so you keep paying to avoid that pain. It's why people stay in comfortable but stagnant situations rather than risk a change that might be better, because the possible loss looms larger than the possible gain. Your brain is wired to protect what you have far more fiercely than to pursue what you could get, which made great survival sense for your ancestors, where a loss could literally mean death while a gain was just a nice bonus. But in modern life, it makes you overly cautious, easily manipulated by loss framing, and prone to clinging to things you should let go of. The defense is to consciously reframe. When you notice you're avoiding a decision out of fear of loss, try flipping the frame. Instead of, what might I lose? Ask, what might I gain, and what am I losing by not acting? Recognize that staying still is itself a choice with its own losses, the opportunities you forego. And when someone is pitching you with loss framing, don't miss out. Last chance, you'll lose this forever. Recognize that they're deliberately pressing your loss aversion button, making a gain feel like an avoided loss, because they know the loss frame is roughly twice as powerful. Naming it takes the air out of it. The thing isn't actually more valuable because it's framed as a loss. It just feels that way, because your brain weighs losses double. Now let me bring in one more, because it's subtle and it shapes your sense of self in a way you'd never suspect. It's about how the simple act of observing yourself or being observed changes your behavior. There's a famous, much debated set of studies from a factory called Hawthorne, where researchers were testing how things like lighting levels affected worker productivity. And the curious finding, the one that gave us the term the Hawthorne effect, was that productivity seemed to improve almost no matter what they changed. Brighter lights, productivity up. Dimmer lights, productivity also up. It seemed like the specific change didn't matter. What mattered was that the workers knew they were being watched, being studied, being paid attention to. The very act of being observed changed their behavior, made them work harder, regardless of the actual conditions. Now, I'll be honest with you again. Just like with the Stanford prison experiment, the original Hawthorne studies have been heavily reanalyzed, and the dramatic story is debated. The data was messier than the legend suggests. But the underlying principle, that being observed changes behavior, is real and shows up all over the place. People behave differently when they know they're being watched. They're more honest, more careful, more likely to follow rules, more likely to perform. It's why the mere presence of a camera, even a fake one, can reduce bad behavior. It's why people drive more carefully past a police car. It's even why studies have found that just putting up a picture of a pair of eyes near an honesty box can make people more likely to pay. Some part of your brain is always running a calculation about whether you're being seen, and it adjusts your behavior accordingly, often without you realizing it. Let me explain why this is worth knowing about yourself. Because you can use it deliberately. If you want to change a behavior, building in observation, accountability, the sense of being watched genuinely helps. Tell someone your goal, work in a public place, track your progress where you'll see it. The feeling of being observed, even by your own recorded data, even by your future self, nudges you toward better behavior. But it's also worth knowing because it means the you that shows up when you think you're being watched and the you that shows up when you're sure you're alone might be meaningfully different people. And that gap is worth being curious about. Who are you when nobody's looking? That's a question this effect quietly puts on the table. Now, I want to pull all of this together because we have covered an enormous amount of ground, and there's a single thread running through every single thing we've talked about, from the very first effect to this last one, and I want to make sure you walk away holding it. Think back over the whole journey, the illusory truth effect, where repetition disguises itself as truth. The Zeigarnik effect, where unfinished tasks hijack your attention. The bystander effect, where a crowd dissolves your sense of responsibility. The placebo and nocebo effects, where your expectations rewrite your physical reality. The unreliability of memory, where confidence has nothing to do with accuracy. Cognitive dissonance, where you rewrite your beliefs to justify what you've already done. Confabulation, where your brain invents reasons for behavior it doesn't actually understand. The Dunning-Kruger effect, where the feeling of competence detaches from actual skill. The availability heuristic, where vividness masquerades as probability. Anchoring, where a random first number bends all your judgments. Milgram, where authority overrides conscience. Ash, where the crowd overrides your own eyes. The 6 principles of influence, where good instincts get hijacked into compliance. The fundamental attribution error, where you judge others by character and yourself by circumstance. The hedonic treadmill, where you adapt back to baseline no matter what you get. Sunk cost and loss aversion, where your past investments and your fear of loss trap you in bad futures. And the Hawthorne effect, where being watched changes who you are. Here's the thread. In every single one of these, your brain is running on autopilot, executing some piece of ancient, efficient, usually helpful machinery, and handing you the result while telling you that the result is just the obvious truth, your own clear-eyed perception of reality. You don't feel the machinery running. You don't experience the bias as a bias. You experience it as simply seeing things how they are. That's the deepest, most unifying lesson of this entire field. Your mind is not a clear window onto reality. It's an active, constructive, shortcut-running machine that builds your experience of the world and then hides its own fingerprints, presenting the construction to you as if it were raw, unmediated truth. The repeated lie just feels true. The unfinished task just feels urgent. The crowd's calm just feels reassuring. The expensive pill just feels more effective. Your memory just feels accurate. Your justification just feels like reasoning. Your competence just feels real. The vivid danger just feels likely. The authority just feels worth obeying. Your loss just feels twice as heavy. None of it announces itself as a trick. That's the whole point. That's why these effects are so powerful, and why so few people ever see them. But you can. That's the thing. That's why any of this matters, why it was worth your time to sit through all of it. Because the single defense that worked against every one of these effects was the same defense over and over in slightly different clothes. Awareness, friction, the pause, the willingness to step back, name the machinery, and ask the uncomfortable question. Do I believe this because it's true or because it's familiar? Am I afraid of this because it's likely or because it's vivid? Am I judging this person by their character when I judge myself by my situation? Am I trapped by what I've already invested or making a clear decision about the future? Is this authority real or just wearing a costume? Am I going along because I agree or because everyone else seems to? You cannot turn these effects off. They're too deep, too automatic, too built into the architecture of being human. Nobody is immune, not the researchers who discovered them, not me, not you. But you can introduce that little half-second of friction, that deliberate pause where you catch the machinery in the act. And in that pause is the only real freedom you've got, the gap between the automatic reaction and the considered choice. Most people live their whole lives never knowing that gap exists. They mistake every one of their brain's constructions for plain reality, and they get steered by repetition, by crowds, by authorities, by salespeople, by their own biases, never once suspecting they're being steered at all. You're not most people anymore, not on these topics anyway. You've seen behind the curtain. You know the machinery is there. You know roughly where the levers are, and you know that the feeling of certainty is not the same as being right. That doesn't make you invulnerable. It makes you something better. It makes you awake. Suspicious of your own confidence in exactly the right way. Curious about your own behavior instead of certain about it. A little kinder to other people because you know they're running the same flawed software you are. And a lot harder to manipulate because the manipulator's whole game depends on you not knowing the buttons exist. The mind is the most powerful tool you will ever have. And for your whole life, it's been running these programs in the background, shaping everything you believe and feel and do, without ever once asking your permission or even telling you it was happening. And the strangest, most twisted thing of all is that until today, you probably had no idea how much of your inner life was being quietly run by machinery you never chose and never saw. Well, now you've seen it, and you can't unsee it. From here on out, you're going to catch these things happening, in the world around you and in your own head. And every time you catch one, you get to choose, just for that moment, to think a little more clearly than your brain would have let you. That's the whole game. That's the prize. Thanks for going this deep with me, and I'll see you in the next one.